Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, 25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Every once in a while, in the course of a lifetime, you need an attorney. Right now, you have an attorney sitting here in the radio station ready to answer some questions you might have. Maybe it'll lead to you paying a visit to John Fuller at his office. This is the show called Legally Yours, and John is an attorney in Ocala at the law firm of Fuller and Fuller. The other Fuller is Janet Fuller, his beautiful wife, and together they run the firm, and John comes in here and answers questions. Once she has come in here and helped answer questions.
Yes, Janet, I wish we could get her in more often because she is very, very talented and very knowledgeable, especially in the area of Social Security disability law.
Yeah.
Today she is at our offices in the Villages, so she spends a lot of time down there. But we will get her back because I know the folks have a lot of questions about Social Security, and it's a very specialized area. We will definitely make that a New Year's resolution to try to do that. And we are appreciative of the chance to meet with you each week, Larry, and to talk to the folks who are kind enough to listen to us. And if they have a question, call in. We practice law. We have offices here in Ocala and the Villages at Fuller and Fuller. We handle cases in litigation of personal injury, wrongful death, serious accident cases, commercial business litigation, and complex family law matters involving substantially contested issues, significant assets, and complex issues that may be involved in connection with that. And of course, Janet does 100% Social Security disability and does that helping folks who have been denied their claim for Social Security disability benefits. If you have a question, we'd be glad to talk with you in general terms. As we've said often on this show, it's the law, the concepts of legal principles aren't always necessarily difficult or complex, but the application can be because they are very dependent upon the facts of each individual case. So if it's a question that falls in the area of our practice and you think you have a case you'd like to talk with us about, our office number is 352-547-4292. But as we're here today, if you have a general question either about the legal system or about some legal question that may have confronted you or a friend or family member, it's always fun to talk about it. We have some very good listeners who call in with very, very interesting questions that raise points of general interest that maybe will enlighten folks a little bit about our judicial system and how it works. There's a lot going on in the country at this particular time. Of course, we don't try to get into the political realm of it very much because folks are always entitled to their opinions, and many people have very strong opinions, and it's not the intent to try to affect any political dialogue, but if it affects a legal issue, then we're certainly happy to try to address it.
Very good. Before we go to the first call, let me announce the phone number for those who don't know it. It is the WOCA Climate Control Source Hotline, which is area code 352-622-9622. That works out to 622 WOCA. Good morning. You're on the air with John Fuller.
Good morning. My question about the law is related to a news article, but I'll change it around a little bit to take the politics out of it.
We'll handle it the best we can. Thank you for calling in.
Okay. If the legislature in a state, let's say New York, passes a law that says I can no longer own a Phillips head screwdriver, doesn't the Constitution protect us from ex post facto laws? How can they make something that was legal yesterday, how can they make that a violation of the law today? Wouldn't the people that already owned Phillips head screwdrivers be, I guess they call it grandfathered in? And I'll just hang up and listen on the radio. Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Well, you mentioned a good point of ex post facto law, and yes, the Constitution has a clause in there that says that you cannot create a law that makes something a crime and then punish someone for the crime that occurred before the law was passed. Whether a particular law is retroactive or not sometimes turns on rather technical questions of whether it's a substantive or procedural matter, and I won't get into that because that's pretty technical legal analysis of a question, and those are usually reserved for things such as rules of evidence or statutory construction, that sort of thing. Generally speaking, if there is a new law passed and that law makes it a crime to own or possess a particular item, the legislature, if it constitutes a taking, in other words, if the law says that you can't, a zoning regulation, for example, that zones your property in a particular way that prevents the highest and best use of the property for which you had purchased it, then you have a claim that that you're entitled to be compensated because it constitutes a taking. It's really hard for me to address with specifics the question, and I do appreciate you putting it in a very great way with the Phillips head screwdriver. They are grandfather provisions. We saw that in the 1994 Clinton crime bill, which made it against the law for the average law-abiding citizen to own to purchase after that date a magazine for a weapon that would hold more than 10 rounds. But if you had the magazines before that, you could continue to own them, but you couldn't buy any new ones, that sort of thing. So yes, there are some grandfathers in provisions.
And you have another phone call. Good morning. You're on the air with John Fuller.
Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning.
I had another question similar, since you did mention something about zoning. Code enforcement and zoning type laws, okay. How is that more subjective than objective? And what I mean is, say if you own a piece of property and someone else you're cited for something and somebody else is much more severe, then you go before a board or something and they waive a fee for one person, and maybe they don't like the way you dress or whatever, and you have to pay the same fee. What type of, rights or do you have? The same thing with the guy that just went all the way to the Supreme Court. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, the suit that had the houseboat, and he had the problems with the houseboat. He won it, but the average guy doesn't have the money to fight that all the way to the Supreme Court. I guess they had taken the houseboat or something because supposedly it was supposed to have been ruled, I guess, a house, and then it wasn't, and all that stuff. But anyway, I'll hang up and let you sort of address those two issues or that one issue.
Well,
and I always enjoy listening to you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you kindly for your comment and for taking the time to call in. I'm not sure that I can specifically answer your question. I can generally comment. Zoning laws have to have a legitimate public purpose. They have to serve the public welfare, and the procedures for implementing zoning, code enforcements, those are all controlled by the specific code of the jurisdiction you're in. The county code has its own provisions, its own enforcement provisions, its own appellate provisions. City code has the same thing. So if we're talking about zoning codes by local government, municipal or county government, they have codified this. And when you ask the question, is it objective or subjective, it is in theory and should be in practice an objective standard, so that the same rules apply to everyone. And if you feel that they are not being enforced appropriately, then you have a complaint to the Code Enforcement Board, and they have hearings to determine whether or not a property owner is in violation of a particular provision of the code. And if they are, and they don't comply with the order to cease and desist, then they have the power to levy fines and that sort of thing. So I don't know about the houseboat case per se. I am not familiar with it. I have not read the case, so I could not comment on the specific details. I do know that there have been in the recent past some concerns from environmental agencies where people have anchored or tied up houseboats in bays and live there on a permanent basis, and there is a question about the sanitary facilities on the boat. Does the boat have sufficient holding tanks? Are they pumped out, or is it being pumped into the water? And so they do have laws that do regulate that. And that has nothing to do with whether a person has a right to own a houseboat or live on the houseboat, but it is essentially whether or not a person has complied with the rules, regulations, or laws that apply to everyone concerning environmental concerns and that sort of stuff. So sometimes you run into that. Again, I'm not familiar with exactly what the issue was on the case with the individual who owned a houseboat and had some appeal to the court. I've not read it, don't know any of the facts.
I'll share it with you. Bottom line is the U.S. Supreme Court decided he had a right to be there because he didn't have a boat, he had a house. And the difference between a boat that's not a house and a boat that is a house is if it can be moved, if it's got a motor, basically. It's a way to propel it. I don't know if I'm throwing you a curve or asking a question that you've addressed before, but I wanted to ask you, do you like or endorse or have any feelings about the prepaid legal that you hear advertised?
Well, first of all, I certainly don't consider myself an expert about the terms and provisions of all the different potential prepaid legal plans that are out there. The ones that I have at least looked at, and I have over the span of my career of many years been approached by a couple of different plans and asked would I be willing to be a participant lawyer of the plan, and they would sell policies and people would buy them, and then when they needed a lawyer they would refer to me. Generally, those plans that I looked at, and they may be much better now and they may be far more expansive than they were a number of years ago, but they generally didn't provide a lot of meaningful coverage. For instance, it would say it would provide payment for an initial consultation, and it would pay a small hourly rate for a conference that would be designed to last an hour. The problem with that is that unlike when you go see a healthcare provider, whether it's a doctor or a registered nurse practitioner or some other healthcare provider, generally speaking, unless you have some serious illness or injury, you go in, you see the professional, they examine you, they are able to make a diagnosis, they prescribe a course of treatment, and it is a finite event. You go in, you get examined, you get diagnosed, you get a treatment, and in most cases it works. We get better and it's easy to compartmentalize that and have a one-time procedural fee for that.
Yeah, right.
There is nothing that is comparable to that in the law. Every legal issue, even the recurrent legal issues that deal with the same body of law. John Doe wants to get divorced from Jane Doe. It involves a myriad of different areas of the law. If John and Jane Doe own a family corporation together, it involves Florida corporate law. It involves Florida corporate income tax law. It involves Florida real property law. It involves Florida tax law or tax law. If John and Jane Doe have children, it involves issues concerning parenting and time sharing and child support. If Jane Doe does not have the financial wherewithal to be self-supporting, then you get into questions of income earning capacity. Could Jane Doe be rehabilitated? So you deal with vocational rehabilitation experts. There is no one set formula, and once the case comes into the office and you collect the data, what is the client's issue? What are the problems? What are the facts that are involved with that? Then the lawyer's work really starts. Investigating, using an investigator to go out and interview witnesses, take photographs, make measurements, hiring and working with experts. Experts are invaluable. Whether it's an engineer in a question involving water law, or whether it is a medical doctor who is examining a person who's been injured in an accident, or a chiropractor or any other healthcare professional, whether or not it's a vocational expert to come in and testify as to what that person's earning capacity is, whether or not it's an economist who would calculate what is the value of someone's lost future income if they've been injured and they've lost their wages or their income. Those are all tools that have to go and be assimilated and then developed, and then the lawyer is a little bit like the director when it gets to trial. He presents his case through testimony of witnesses, documentary evidence, photographs, and by challenging the evidence against him by cross-examination, which is a useful tool to challenge the truth and veracity of somebody else's statement and impeach that by a variety of techniques that are learned through a diligent study of the laws of evidence. And so I have found that the policies I looked at, so they say they would pay X amount of dollars for a person to have a consultation with a lawyer. There's very little that the lawyer can do for that person in that type of a scenario. And most of those plans did not pay and they certainly would not cover things like if you were arrested and charged with a criminal offense. It's against public policy to have an insurance policy that covers you and pays for an intentional act in terms of fines or that sort of thing.
Interesting.
So I don't know. Maybe they're better now. Maybe they're more expansive, and I'm just not familiar with them. But you don't see them very often, and I personally don't know of anybody who actually subscribes to or participates in one of those plans.
All right. Well, then I won't be getting one. Not that I was going to, but I saw an ad for one. I said I hadn't heard of one of them in years.
Right.
I used to see somebody with a magnetic sign on his car, and that's what he was selling. And
yeah. And you know, if used to be, well, I want to buy a house. Well, then someone they do a deed for you or something like that. But buying a house is a very complicated thing now. You have so many different requirements.
And you have another phone call. Good morning. You're on the air with John Fuller.
Larry, I'm so glad you asked that question, and I appreciate this answer because years ago I got rooked into a plan like that, and I paid it for a few years. And then we had a family issue where we needed a real estate attorney, and the plan was totally useless. And I had put a lot of money in it for a few years, and I got more information from the Florida bar for free than I did through that prepaid legal stuff.
Right.
So,
right. Well, I'm so glad you called and made that comment. That's very interesting, and I thank you for taking the time to share that with us.
Yeah, I certainly had that experience, and all that money I spent on that for the years it really wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good. You know what? And I feel bad for the guy trying to sell it, but he's selling something that's kind of like almost like ripping us. Maybe he's a victim too. I don't know.
It's a hard product to try to
Thank you very
craft.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
And you have another phone call, John. Good morning. You're on the air with John Fuller.
This is Bruce. I have a piece of property, mineral rights up in Ohio. And the Sunnybrook Coal Company has gone underneath the ground there and stolen the minerals out from underneath it. So I went up there and went into the courthouse and took the old book and got the old book and found out Sunnybrook had tore the sheet clear out of there. And all I have is a deed. Is there anything that I get a chance to get back at it?
You need to call an Ohio lawyer.
that takes care of that. Huh?
Yes, sir. That's the very best legal advice I can give you. Mineral rights are a part of fee simple ownership of real property under Florida law. If you own a parcel of property in what is called fee simple absolute, you own all the not just the land, but what's under the land. However, years ago in Florida, when the phosphate boom was big, people who own land who would be using the land for maybe agricultural purposes for a number of years or whatever, they would sell the mineral rights in the future. And you will still see sometimes in old abstracts where property is being sold, and you'll notice that back in the early 1900s, at one point in time, they sold the mineral rights to some phosphate company that's probably no longer even in existence, and it creates what is a defect in the title to the property of the land if you go to sell it, because you no longer own all of the attributes of the land, all of the fee simple absolute. So then you have to either reacquire the mineral rights by purchasing them back or filing a suit to extinguish those rights in the court. So it can get very complex, but Ohio law, every state's laws are different, and whatever your remedies are, they would be in the state of Ohio, and the only way you could have any meaningful answer to that question would be to consult with and hire an Ohio lawyer.
Well, I thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for calling.
God bless you.
That's got to be frustrating. I mean, you get the mineral rights and somebody's taking it and they leave you with nothing.
Well, you know, in the old days, people thought that they were, it was an agricultural economy, and they wanted to grow crops on the land, and if they could sell mineral rights to someone else, and those mineral rights weren't going to be used and interfere with their farming, it was a way of generating revenue. Or sometimes the converse of that, somebody thought that their property may have valuable minerals under it. I think my only example that I'm aware of is like phosphate. I don't think anybody seriously thought there was oil or gas or gold or anything like that. But anyhow, you would see people sell property from John Doe to Jane Doe and convey to that person the property, but reserve in themselves all of the mineral rights.
Interesting. Yeah, we were reading about that or talking about it maybe a week or two ago. There was something in the news about that. I don't remember exactly the story.
It's much more, it is a much better developed body of law, And a much more critical area of the law where you see a lot of litigation in states like Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, where there are big oil and natural gas reserves, or in West Virginia or other states where there are coal reserves and things of that nature. You will find that there's a huge area of specialized law, a huge body of specialized law, and a lot of lawyers who specialize in oil and mineral rights and litigation.
John, we are out of time, and again, it went quick as it always does.
Nice.
So how do we get a hold of you? What's your number?
Yes, our office number is 352-547-4292. We have a toll-free number, 855-534-2565. If you or a loved one has been injured in an accident or have a business dispute, complex family law matter, Social Security disability, and you think you would like to talk with us about them in detail, call, make an appointment. We'll try to help you. Thank you so much for the folks who called in. Thank you, Larry. It's always a fun time.
Thank you, John. It is always entertaining and educational. We'll take a little break and be right back.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Life jackets save lives. Wear it, Florida. Partly sunny today and unseasonably warm. High 79 to 83. Partly cloudy and mild tonight, low 61 to 65. Tomorrow, partly sunny, breezy, and not as warm. Look for a couple of showers. Highs in the 70s. Friday, partly sunny and much cooler. There'll be some showers, especially along the coast. The high 62 to 66. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
Every day we hear another story about innovation or about cutting-edge technology taking place right here in Ocala. The power plant, IHMC, Ocala 489. Did you know that important medical research is also being conducted here that may impact hundreds of thousands of people in the country someday? Maybe you've heard the name Renstar, but like so many others, perhaps you didn't realize that Renstar Medical Research is one of the top facilities of its kind anywhere in the U.S. There are important research studies being conducted